What do you think of live streaming climbing ascents in general?
I think it's cool. I think it's like a cool insight into the process that hasn't really been documented or hasn't been really exposed to a lot of people before. So I think I think it, depending on your interest in climbing, I think it could be something that becomes really popular in the next few years, especially just with all the, just like all the technology now that makes it so easy to do that. But, I think as a filmmaker, I don't necessarily think it takes away so much either from like the storytelling aspect as much. I think it does limit some aspects of the surprise or of like saving one moment for a film or documenting it in some way. But I still think there's a lot of opportunity for that despite it being streamed live.
So you don't think, because that's one of my questions, so you don't think that live streams will kill the existence of climbing movies or like tours like Real Rock?
I don't think so. I think it's just going to be part of the evolution of climbing documentary and the way that our sport is just perceived by the public. But I think it doesn't take away from the storytelling aspect of film, which is really what I think is the most grabbing part of like the Real Rock films or others. I think people are interested in the live stream, but they also want to see a lot more than just the climbing, and they want to hear from the athlete. And I think there's still a lot that's left untold with the live stream.
Do you think in the future it's like part of the game for a pro climber to do a live stream?
I don't think it's necessary, no, because I think if you want to approach that as an athlete, that's great. But I think a lot of climbers, including myself, like I really like being out there, being on the rock, being like in my own element climbing without having cameras, without having like all these eyes on me. I think it definitely changes the feeling of what you're doing a bit when you set up a camera and people are watching. It's going to definitely impact your behavior a bit, or at least your mental process. So I don't think it's going to be something that everyone starts to do, because I think a lot of climbers still really appreciate just like kind of the simplicity of climbing.
So will we see a live stream of one of your ascents in the future?
Yeah, I wouldn't say no. I find it interesting, and I think, it's a cool thing to share with your followers and the people that are interested. So, if that opportunity did come up one day, then yeah, I wouldn't be against it.
Why do you think Jakob and Will, they decided to do a live stream of their ascent?
I think they have maybe grown into that element or that side of their climbing story in sharing every aspect of their projecting process. I think they're both very open and very like they want people to follow along with their journey very much, and they're very comfortable with that. And I think the live stream just is a natural, like the most clear way to be that honest and that open with what you're doing, and how things are going on your project. So, for those types of climbers that really want to share everything and be, public about the entire process, the live stream is the easiest way.
Like looking back a bit in the climbing history or even your career, how did Instagram and YouTube change the way or the pro climbers live?
Yeah, social media in general has completely changed the environment for pro climbers. There's so much more pressure on, whether you are posting a lot or whether you have a YouTube channel now, or just like what you're sharing about yourself. There's a lot more pressure than there used to be, especially when I started getting sponsors and started, the professional climbing life. I definitely feel how things have changed more recently, and I feel more incentive or just more, pressure from my sponsors to be more public and be more like documenting the process. And I think in the beginning, it was pretty easy to just get a photo for Instagram and share a photo of an accomplishment or even just the process of what you're doing. And now a photo doesn't necessarily do justice, or it's not really enough for the viewers. You need to have more of a story, or at least, you know, a film or something. And I think it has changed, you know, the landscape of what it means to be a pro climber very much. Just it used to be more simple, and I think it's now there's more weight on you kind of being your own brand and being your own marketing brand. You know, for instance, like if you're not being public about those things, it's a lot harder these days to make it as a professional climber.
Do you think today's climbers are more social media managers than climbers?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that to be a professional climber, you need to be a social media manager at this point. You know, it's unfortunate. I think it's not necessarily what I would like to see in our sport, because it's so unique for us. And you look at any other sport, you know, there's media outlets that are actually doing that job for you, or your sponsors are doing that for you. But now that is relying so heavily on the athlete, and I think it does take a bit away from, you know, the main goals and objectives that we have as climbers. You know, I think a lot of people, you know, they seek out projects with the content in mind, you know, and before it was seeking out projects for the project, you know, and now it's like, I feel like a lot of, you know, like someone would go to a climb to make a video rather than to actually like have a process and have an experience with that climb, you know. And I think just having a camera always with you, or having a film crew always with you, it does change the experience very much.
Could you imagine a life like Adam Ondra, who's, in my perspective, is surrounded by cameras all the time when climbing?
Yeah. Could I imagine a life like that? I think I'm going to have to. I think I'm going to have to start to adjust to that kind of lifestyle. You know, like I think I would do it with a bit more limitations than what I see from other athletes. You know, I think I've typically kind of hid behind the camera in my climbing career, and you know, I feel pretty comfortable in front of a camera, but I do really enjoy just being at the cliff and climbing and not having to think about, you know, are they ready for me to climb so they can get the shot, or do I have to, you know, do an interview after I climb? Like all these things, like I really do enjoy just the moments that you have when you're just with one or two other people at the cliff. But, you know, I want to pursue this career for many, many more years, and I think, you know, it's going to take some adjusting into being more in the public eye a bit, so...
But I'm actually a bit surprised that as a videographer, you're still saying, no, for me, I want to be alone at the rock.
I mean, I've always just had such a strong passion for climbing, and, you know, I've felt in my entire career I have not wanted to share everything that I'm doing, or I don't always need to have an opinion on everything that's happening, and I just want to climb and you know, express myself on the rock and kind of let my climbing speak for itself. And you know, I think nowadays it's you know, there's that, like what I was saying, like that landscape has changed, or it's shifted, and you need to be more in the public eye with everything. And you know, I think that I am willing to make those changes. Like I don't have a problem with what other athletes are doing. I find it very interesting, and like I watch a lot of the content that gets released. But I also, you know, I came from a place in which I fell in love with climbing, and I don't necessarily want to like drift far away from that. You know, I want to. I realize that I want to pursue this for a lot longer, so I need to adapt to the environment. But I don't want to really lose my roots there. So. And I think photography for me has always been something that I didn't feel so distracting for climbers, or even like that invasive at the crag. You know, it's very easy to take out your camera, take a few photos and put it away, and really didn't disrupt anything, you know. And it also, for me, has been a great way to kind of like share my side of things just with taking photos of other athletes and giving them photos, or just like I've always wanted to help my fellow athletes and, you know, support them in ways that I can. And, you know, now I think I got to start getting more photos of myself out there, you know, but that's totally fine. I think it makes complete sense. It's just, I just got to make sure that I keep climbing for the right reasons, and I don't, you know, my main goals and objectives in climbing don't get overshadowed by content desires, you know, or likes on a photo or something like that, you know.
You still try to climb for the climb and not for the awareness you can raise with the climb.
Yeah. And, you know, I think a lot of the connections I've made and like the impact I've had comes from the time I spent at the cliff meeting people, or the time that I spent at events talking to people, and just like the actual personal interactions that I have. And, you know, I think there's a bit of like the realness is lost in media, and just like what you see or what you read or what you just, you know, what pops up on YouTube, you know, it's all very curated, and it's I don't know, it's not really how you make real connections. I don't think it's how you gain views or followers or whatever, but yeah, I think I just gotta bridge the gap a little bit and find balance, but, you know, I think we're all trying to work on that.
What's the new role of climbing media today?
I think maybe exploring deeper topics than just the headlines, and getting a bit more information about the process or the athlete that you don't see in an Instagram post, or you don't read about like in most of the headlines, where it's just, you know, some history or some previous ascents and then what led up to this. It's more like, you know, just a bit of the harder questions that maybe you wouldn't write yourself unless you were asked them, or just, you know, diving into topics that you don't see every day, or things that you don't, you know, because I feel like nowadays you see so many ascents constantly on Instagram or other social media, you know, it's like, it's almost like overwhelming how much like people are climbing, you know. So I think it's more like, you know, like learning more about the person and getting a bit more deep into the topic than what you can just scroll by, you know.
I mean, back in the days, Kurt Alba and Wolfgang Güllich, they invented the idea of red point climbing.
Yeah.
And the idea was, red point climbing is the route is clear, you have your quick draws, you put them in and you do it, then it's a red point.
Yeah.
If the quick draws are in, it's pink point.
Yeah.
Nowadays, everybody calls it a red point, but it's not actually from the original idea, a red point is set. There is even pre-clipped rope when you do a red point descent. Do you think we somehow don't respect the original idea? Or?
I don't think it has to do about respect. I certainly don't think the loss of the term red point in sport climbing specifically is out of disrespect for that original, you know, ethic. But I think, you know, just with the way that climbing has evolved, that term is kind of scarce these days. You know, you show up to a cliff, like if you went into red point biography, there's no chance that you're gonna clean the draws every time, you know, because there's other people trying it, and it wouldn't make sense to take all the draws off and then let someone else, like if they're just working it, have to hang their own draws again. Or you show up to a cliff and you know, the whole crag is fixed with permanent carabiners, you know. It's like there's no red pointing then at that cliff. And I think, you know, also with the difficulty of the routes these days, hanging draws just isn't necessarily feasible on a lot of the hardest routes. It's already hard enough to just make a single clip. That, you know, I think that's one of the more interesting things about sport climbing, is it is just about the physicality and pushing yourself, and it doesn't have to be about the gear, you know. And I think so much of that also can rely on how the bolts were placed before that, and if you can even reach the bolt. You know, sometimes if you're a lot taller, the bolt is out of reach, so you need a double draw or something. So it introduces all these challenges that aren't necessarily fair if you're constantly having to hang the quick draws for every try. And you know, I think red pointing and pink pointing, as in traditional climbing, makes complete sense, right? Because that is very much a part of the aspect of traditional climbing, is placing the gear and doing that while you're climbing. Like, I don't think that will ever get lost necessarily. And when it comes to like stick clipping, like I myself am pretty against starting with the rope pre-clipped. I will do it like on biography, for instance. I had the first one clipped, but that I know is how everyone has done the route, and it's also because it's very easy to fall, and you would just fall into a pile of rocks, you know, like you could bring up crash pads and you could boulder that section, you know, and that would be more pure, that would be like a better ethic. But, you know, I think you kind of should follow the suit of the climbers that have come before you, in the sense, like, if Chris started with the first one clipped, then I think most of the people after him will do that, until maybe one person does it without, you know. But yeah, I think it's just kind of how it's evolved, but I don't think it's out of disrespect or anything. Yeah.
Do you think we would have 9C routes today with the original idea of red point?
I mean, I think it would no, I would almost say no. I don't know for sure because I haven't tried 9C, but I know that, you know, on those that end of the difficulty, or those types of routes, like clipping is already so challenging, and usually you are already skipping multiple draws on those types of routes. And you know, I think I think one day, you know, there's going to be some type of self-clipping carabiner, you know, that like you don't even have to clip, you just climb and it clips the rope in for you. And that's where 9C plus, 9D, that's where those routes are going to start to come in, you know, like, because I think being the safety aspect of climbing is definitely holding back us pushing the difficulty a bit. Because really, like, if you never had to stop and you could keep climbing through hard boulder, like, that's where the hardest grades are going to be, you know. As soon as you get to a hold where you can clip, you're resting a bit, or you're in a more relaxed position. So, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if one day there's auto clipping carabiners, or maybe they're just placed in like the crux of the route, you know, like some really expensive carabiner.
Or
that like detects, you know, an AI quick draw that sees the rope and just kind of like grabs it as you go by, you know, like I think that'll be a whole nother ethical dilemma in the future.
Yeah, true.
But
yeah, because we discussed the topic about the pink point, red point. Why did that idea got lost somehow?
Yeah, I mean, there used to be the ethic where if you fell, you just had to go back to the ground, mm-hmm. until someone just took for a moment and worked out the sequence, and then kept going to the anchor and just, you know, put tick marks on all the holds. And, you know, like, I think it's just the natural evolution of climbing, but I don't think the terminology has taken away from what people are doing. You know, I don't think anyone's really talking about a red point as being invalid because the quick draws were already there. I think that's not really a conversation that's happening.
Not at all, no.
Yeah.
So we were discussing, I mean, there is the ethics, the original idea, let's say, and the physical aspect. I think people just start to say, why should we always take away the quick draws? Why all that bullshit we want to climb? You know, it's about the climbing and the difficulty, the physical and mental of the climb, but not removing quick drives.
And I mean, you're already putting bolts in the rock. You know, it's like you're already leaving something there that's permanent. So, you know, I think hanging a quick draw on the bolt, it's like it's normal. I don't think anyone thinks twice about it now. And I think, you know, ethics in climbing have changed throughout the years. Like, there's always something that will continue to evolve. You know, we're learning how to best approach climbs and be, you know, very clear about how we did something. Like it's all very much an evolving thing in our sport, and I think it's not finished, you know.
What are ethics and things we should discuss at the moment in our sport?
I think the biggest things that I am aware of personally is maybe just chipping and gluing of climbs. I think it's not really talked about, and I think it's something that should probably be clear if you're putting up a first ascent. Like, did you have to alter the rock, or did you have to, you know, reinforce certain holds to make this a feasible rock climb, you know, and is that something that we want to continue to do, or is that something that, you know, we should try to avoid in the future? And I think more and more we're going towards the idea that that's wrong and we shouldn't be altering the rock in any way. And I think, you know, 10, 15 years ago, everyone was drilling pockets and, you know, making gym routes outside. But a lot of those routes are now kind of looked down upon, I think. And yeah, I mean, that to me in sport climbing is probably the biggest topic that I am aware of. And, you know, I think when it comes to like multi-pitch or trad climbing or alpine climbing, like just being very clear about your style of how you did it is something that kind of gets lost in media and news sometimes. And I think once you start to reinforce holds, it brings into the question, this isn't talking about DNA specifically, but just reinforcing holds or chipping holds in general, it brings into question, like, are you doing this in your benefit? You know, are you reinforcing holds where you want them to be reinforced and breaking away other holds? You know, you're kind of designing the route for your own skill set a bit at that point, you know. And I think that to me is the biggest problem with that whole movement of Sika and creating climbs like that, because you in a sense are setting the route for yourself at that point. You're choosing what stays and what goes. And I think at the top of the game, when you're putting up first ascents, and you know, if they are some of the hardest routes in the world, it shouldn't be specifically designed for yourself, you know.
So you're a total purist and say not even reinforcing, because if the hold breaks, it's a different route, and if it's not possible anymore, maybe in 10 years it's possible or something. Yeah,
I mean, I'm a bit like unsure of how like, for me, this is something that I go back and forth a lot with, because I grew up in Rifle, Colorado, which it's notorious for bad rock. And you could probably keep breaking away holds on certain routes until there's no more rock, you know, and eventually you have to put Sika to reinforce holds and to create a manifest a route, you know. And there's an incredible amount of routes there that are, to me, 4 or 5 star routes, but they have Sika on them, you know. And I think now I think that's not as okay as I did when I was younger, you know. I didn't really consider it as a negative thing, but I also think people like to kind of create their own challenges sometimes, and you know, like, it's easy to put Sika on a hold because you could do that move, you know, that way, and if the hold's gone, then you in your eyes it's impossible, right? But someone else will come around and they'll find a way, and if it's not in a few years, maybe a decade, like, it will be climbed. You know. And I think you know, there's very specific instances in which maybe a hold should be glued, for instance, like on a route that's maybe historic or very, very, you know, famous in climbing, and if you can find a way to put that hold on exactly how it was, then maybe after talking to the first ascensionist, maybe it's a good idea to maintain the original climb, you know. But I also think, you know, rock breaks, and that's very much a part of the sport, and climbs evolve, you know, beta gets figured out, and you know, I think more and more my mindset is going that Sika shouldn't really ever be used, you know.
Should evolve the route as the sport evolves.
And you know, it's like if a hold breaks on biography, then you know the next ascents after that it's slightly harder, you know, and that's just how it goes, you know. It's not like an unknown fact if a hold breaks on a famous route, you know. It's like it will get a harder grade, or it will be, you know, people will talk about it. So you know, I think it's kind of just the way our sport is going, is that chipping and gluing is going to be a thing of the past. Yeah. Yeah.
True.
I mean, I hope so.
Yeah.
I think, you know, it's a shame when you go to a cliff and you see an amazing line and you realize that all the holds have been chipped. You know, the possibility of what was there is gone, you know, and it will never be, you know, and it can be really disappointing. And I think a lot of crags around the US and around Europe, you know, from 30 years ago, they were destroyed in a sense. In today's eyes, you know. Back then it was more like creating climbs for everyone, but now I think it's a bit of a missed opportunity, you know.
There is a famous route in Ticino. It's called Deus Irea. It's 8C+. It wasn't by Giuliano's father, Claudio, and I think for many years nobody could climb it, but he didn't do anything to the route. And then Dave Graham did the first ascent. So it was like, for me, it's an example. He could have chipped some things to climb it, but he said, no, we don't. We wait until somebody can climb it. It's the best example.
I mean, that's great, because like the things that people are doing today, like even 6-7 years ago, people wouldn't have thought was possible. You know, like we're rapidly improving as athletes and climbers, and our tactics are getting better, and the gyms are better, you know. Our ways of just approaching climbs is more strategic. Like the sport is going a long way right now, and you know, I think there's not enough rocks still for us despite all of the things that are getting done, you know.